Hello and welcome to Safety Revolution, a Veeva podcast exploring the intersection of technology and innovation in pharmacovigilance. I'm David Kološić, a Director of Safety Strategy. Today I'm joined by Adrian Maynier, Head of Safety Systems at UCB. How's it going? It's great to have you.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me today.
And I'm also here with Mayuran Croos, a Principal Consultant at Veeva.
Hi, David. Happy to be here.
Yeah, we have an exciting conversation ahead of us, a lot of interesting topics to go through, but maybe let's start with the introductions first.
My name is Adrian, and I've been in the industry for 21 years, the last 7 at UCB Pharma, and there my job now is the Head of Safety Systems and responsible for the oversight and the smooth operation of the safety systems.
Nice. Welcome.
Mayuran, been in PV space for close to 15 years and spent the last 5 years at Veeva, all in safety.
Great. So what I like about this episode is that we have the industry perspective, because you've been in the industry for more than 20 years. And also we have more the technology perspective because you've been implementing safety systems for more than 10 years. So I think collectively you guys have seen the evolution of the safety landscape. So maybe let's start there, right? A lot has changed in the last years. There's a big shift from on-premise to cloud systems. That was one of the big changes. But there's also a big shift from point solutions to more platform approach. So going a little bit back, Adrian, how have things changed and how has that defined your high-level strategy of where you want to go next?
I think the one consistent thing is change. Change is the constant. But definitely over the last years, there's been impact on the movement into cloud. And for many companies as well, I think there's been a move for outsourcing and offshoring. And that's also impacted the strategy around systems and combining your operations with the system and things like that. At the moment, I think what we're looking for is integration and consolidation. In UCB, for example, I think we have 17 systems now just in safety. And then you have 17 systems all with different suppliers and many with different infrastructure. And it creates a real patchwork. And we want them all to be integrated. And that becomes increasingly complicated. The more systems you add, the more data you push through the systems, and the more complicated these interfaces become.
Because of the different systems they use, a lot of the process were duplicated in many places. And this takes a lot of time, resources, and money. I think this unified process is what the industry is moving towards. I remember 10 years ago when implementing it, all the application solutions are created in isolations. And they're like an army of people kind of reconciling data from one application to the other. And then the industry wants to move away from that. Data available in one place and should be able to access in another part, and should be able to make those reconciliations much easier than what it was.
Yeah, it's a lot of systems to maintain. It's and the data is just being scattered around the place, right? As much as you want to integrate the data flows, doesn't always work, right? So it's copy pasting and making sure the data is aligned, right?
I think one of the trends now, it's not just integration, but consolidation of systems into something that's more secure and more maintainable, and also gives us the benefits of less duplication, and we see, I guess, the defining single sources of data, and seeing that there's not duplication and repetition of activities through the processes.
You've been looking at the PV landscape over the past years. What were some of the check boxes that you said, okay, if this new technology checks all of these boxes, we are ready to make that move?
Well, I think so. The first part is that alignment with what's become a bit of a corporate vision, and there it's much bigger than safety. So we talk about our safety landscape and that being fragmented. But in our in the IT department, they're managing a whole corporation, and then you zoom out, and then you have regulatory, and they have the same problems, and clinical, and they have the same problems, and quality, and they have the same problems, and safety is we feel very small in comparison. And it's important to be able to sometimes to put on your company hat and look at the bigger picture and see that see the overall thing, and that it's not just safety on their own as an island, but we're part of a bigger company with end-to-end processes of which safety is an important contributor, and then that we fit in and with the company vision. Which is to have these end-to-end processes operating smoothly and effectively without duplication and repetition, and in secure and secure sound environments. So that's the first thing I think that we're looking for. It's that compatibility with the overall corporate vision and the ability to deliver this end-to-end process transformation beyond just safety, but within the bigger picture of the R&D environment. The second thing is most definitely compliance and stability. So safety is a complex landscape, and we have a lot of global requirements which are not necessarily standardized and simple, and being able to maintain compliance in a really complex global environment is absolutely critical.
And it's becoming even more complex, right? Because regulations keep changing, and what we are seeing in different regions is they put their own spin on it, meaning that the industry has to figure out how to keep that compliance globally for all of the product types that you would have. But also, I think that's a good fresh perspective, because for so long we've been operating in silos, and all of a sudden we're now saying, well, actually, let's try to work together, and that's what the platforms actually do offer.
That's a good point. I mean, I always wondered that the global regulations are the same, but every implementation I've done, there's always a different interpretation of that law. I mean, 10, 15 years later, I still don't have an answer to this. So is this because the regulations are super clear and then opens the door for different interpretation?
It is a constant source of anxiety, isn't it? So the regulations are written at a relatively high level, and they require some interpretation. Even when there are organizations or regulatory organizations that offer more detailed guidelines, there's still a degree of interpretation that's there. And that results in very subtle difference in interpretation can result in a system where you have to be really, really precise in how you work and how you program. There needs to be some judgment that's made along the way, and some interpretation of how you're going to meet the requirement.
That makes standardization difficult, right? Because that's what we are striving for. We are striving for standardizing globally, but then if the regulation is open for interpretation, you can look at 2-3 different companies that might have different ways of solving the same problem.
Yeah, but it's much better than it used to be, I think, in many ways. So there has been great steps made, at least in the 20 years that I've been in industry. I think there's been a general trend towards standards and common interpretations. It's much better.
When you implement 5 different solutions for same regulation based challenge, you really get a perspective of what's really a best practice based on a particular scenario. So when you go to somebody else to have the same issue, then you already have the answers figured out. So this is why it's important that we don't just implement it, but we really understand what is the real best practice here, and that becomes standardization in our product, and also something that we recommend as a best practice.
Now we're trying to harmonize and streamline and get things together, and that also means having local and global working together, having CROs working together.
When you consolidate effort into a central mass. You build expertise and you reduce, I guess, variations in processes. So you have end up with more simplified standard processes. You have this specialization and concentration of knowledge. And in any industry, I think that makes the business more efficient and more effective and leads to better quality, better outcomes. So yeah, I'm a big fan in that sense of harmonization and of centralization of activities.
So we have this very ambitious project right now where we are going to put case processing, reporting, signal detection, plus content under the same roof. I'm not sure if that has been done before at this scale and this level. What was the thinking behind unifying all of these processes under the same place?
Not to mention in the time frame we're looking to do this.
Yeah. So I actually think in our case it was just a pragmatic approach, and it's around the integration of the systems. So we talk about the value that we get from the integration and alignment, and that was true even before Veeva came along, and our legacy systems are all highly integrated and dependent on each other. And in our case, I think it was a very simple equation of is it easier to break the connections and rebuild them one by one, or do we move everything together? And I think it's a lot of work, and it's a very aggressive scope that we have. But we actually think it's in the long run, it's probably more efficient just to try and move everything at once than to break them up and do them piece by piece.
Yeah, but this is the interesting approach you took, because, of course, you have done regular assessments, as we talked about. You were kind of looking at the landscape, understanding if the time was right for this. And when you felt the time was right, then you actually had your initiation phase, which was, the idea was to do a more detailed analysis, but also align people strategically, right?
No, I would agree. It was one of the things that I would do again if we had to do it again. Having the what I guess we call it an extended initiation phase, and we didn't engage Veeva for that whole period of time. But on our side, we were busy for a long period of time setting up the project, and what we did was bring in then Veeva and for a consultancy engagement early on, just to help us. And one of the objectives there were to learn about the product and its the strengths and weaknesses, and also what we would need to complete the implementation.
Because I remember at the end of the initiation that we had a objective, like everything that we wanted to learn, or UCB wanted to learn, listed out, and also every task they wanted to complete or be ready for by the time we get to the implementation phase. That's all being written down. So we weren't involved at the end of it, as not that much, but we were still kept in loop. But we know all the tasks that, we told them, okay, you have to get your library data, you have to go and figure out your migration process and all of these things. They were working. So when the project was kicked off, I felt like we were ready.
It was definitely helpful. And afterwards, we had, it impacted the resourcing discussions, the budgeting process, selection of partners, as well as, preparation activities for the implementation project itself. But the other big benefit, I think, is around change management and aligning stakeholders and having a good long runway leading into the project, especially after doing the consultancy and trying to work out optimized business processes, and having a runway into the beginning of the project really helped to keep people aligned and to perhaps to cascade the alignment and give people time to absorb it and to to switch over, because it's not a small change that we're going through, and giving people some time to absorb it was actually quite helpful.
It's almost like a full-time job. So how do you guys manage because your day-to-day work doesn't stop, you still go through inspections and audits and, everything else in between. How do you plan for a big project like this, as well as, doing your day-to-day stuff?
We try and isolate people as much as possible to work on the project. And that was actually that's a key thing when you have to work, in 20% of your time on a project. It just it really doesn't work. So we've tried to get people, at least all of the core participants, to be 80% of their time available for the project, and we've done that by a couple of things. One is obviously it's just by deprioritizing other activities. So we would normally have a base load of projects running, and they all have to stop to make room for the implementation project, and that creates some time. And otherwise, we hired backfills, and that was also one of the activities that we started early on. Onboarded people to take over the day-to-day activities, so then that frees up the time of the key participants to focus on the project.
Yeah, and you mentioned the change management, because your change management is not just to go to the case processes and say, hey, we're going to change the database. That's something that has been done before, but you had to go to benefit risk. You had to go to the QPPV office and kind of have conversations on all levels. And one we haven't discussed about is also Japan, right? Because Japan historically, and also the UCB, is operating as an independent entity, as an affiliate with their own people, processes, technology. And you made an interesting decision to say, well, actually, let's not do anything there just yet. Let's align strategically, but we will be implementing that piece a little bit late in time. What was the thinking behind this decision?
Well, where we could minimize scope, we did. Like you say, it's a big project, and you want to avoid doing too much at one time. And Japan is a really complicated part, and we don't have the greatest visibility always into what happens in Japan. And for us, that was it was following the rule of thumb. It was easier to disconnect it and reconnect it and do it later than to try and move it all at the same time.
The different thing that I saw what UCB's approach is, they really came together to understand what are the processes where we can globally align, right? And then let's align on those processes. Let's adopt the process. If the global process needs to be adopted, yes. Or truly, wherever the regulation demands you do things differently in Japan, we understood what they are, and then we incorporate it into the global process. So when you look at it from end-to-end perspective, it actually makes sense. But it's not like Japan wasn't like an afterthought. We were already preparing for Japan while we were doing the global implementation.
Indeed, yeah, we took care to include them right from the very, very beginning, in the very early phases of the planning and the process discussions. We included them in the global process design, and then that hopefully cascades later on into change management and smoother alignment.
So we talked about technology, we talked about change management. Process changes have to be pretty significant as well, because the ways of working just have to change fundamentally. Where do you even start? Did you look at your as-is processes and try to amend them, or you just said, hey, let's have a blank sheet and let's look how the future can look like with the new technologies that we have available?
Bit of both. I'm going to say a bit of both. And so we had we had business consultants come and walk us through the process redesign, and that helped. But yeah, it's both. It's important to free your mind and to be able to work at what the future state is going to be. But yeah, indeed, we did also start with the as-is mapping and then the to-be processes, and that was the led through that activity, and it's good to know the as is process reminds you what's important, and flushes out all these little things that you might not otherwise, or not everybody is always aware of.
From your perspective, Mayuran, so of course your team is implementing technology, a different team is looking at the processes. Somehow you have to align the two. How do you actually make sure that what they are discussing in the design process is aligned with our best practices, and also making sure that what is being discussed can actually be implemented?
In UCB's case, is really we took our time to understand their as is process. This is how they're doing it today, and from earlier on, we understood wherever it's not in line with what we consider as a best practice, we question them. Why is it done this way? And there's a good reason. Most of the time is either previous audit findings, or the process was put in place for a good reason. But is it still true? Can we do it differently? And this is the best practice in Veeva. Can we adopt this? And UCB has always been open to considering them, so which made our life a little bit easier. So what we did is if there's something that we could get them to adopt the best practice, that's going to get them to stay with the out-of-the-box application as much as possible. So maintenance going forward would be easier. And also, you can do things a bit more quicker there. And wherever we think that, okay, they do have a best practice and we're not aligned with it, that's a direct feedback to the product team. So we've raised a number of feature requests, and those are being targeted. So it's a partnership. So they were open to adapt wherever they think, okay, they should change their process. And we were open to adapt the best practice in the product. So together, hopefully we'll have a product in place that is, we don't need much changes, then mostly align with best practices.
And that's also one of the important guiding principles here is avoid customization if not necessary, right? I think that's also what the cloud platforms give you is high configurability, right?
The limits of what you can do under the banner of configuration are quite broad, and we're lucky we haven't really encountered any limits yet. Of course, there might be some things still to come, but at this stage in the project, we're doing well on the strategy for adopting the standard out-of-the-box practices.
Yeah, I think one of the key words you mentioned before was partnership, right? That's a big one because there's so many people involved in this project. There's so many work streams, so many things happening at the same time. How do you even keep this engine well-oiled and running with aggressive goals, big implementation scope, and so many people running around trying to get the project done?
Is there a magic answer to that one? No, I don't know. So I actually think probably the key is it's just having the right people in a few key roles, and that really helps make the difference. They're like the important nodes on the web, and they make decisions and route information quickly between the right parts of the project, the other nodes, and that helps keep things on track.
And I think this is one of the important things that has to come out of the initiation phase, that really understanding the people, that everyone has a same goal, that's making UCB successful. So if everyone's aligned on that common goal, who are going to work towards that? The partner's going to work towards that. So there's no people not going in a different path. So even when there's difference of opinion, we come together, we discuss it, and finally agree on what the approach is. So I think we repeated that throughout the process, and then we're still doing that. I think that helps.
Open space, people can voice their opinions, and then of course you are kind of finding the middle ground that works for everyone. But maybe looking into the future, let's say we look into the next 5 years, what do you think is going to be a solved problem? Or let's say, to ask differently, what is a business challenge today that you think is going to be a solved problem in the next 5 years?
I know what Adrian's going to say, but I'll let him say that.
Yeah. So, one of the objectives that we've had for a long time is around automation, and the the big question in industry, in any kind of business at the moment, is how does artificial intelligence impact automation and our future work and future processes. And we've been experimenting with AI in applications for a long time, and with very mixed results, I must say as well. And there's a lot of hype in the industry still around AI, and it's perhaps kicking off again with a new hype cycle at the moment. So for me, something I'm really looking forward to seeing is the evolution of artificial intelligence into the business, and I'm really curious to see what that implementation or what it will look like in 5 years' time.
Yeah, AI for me is like an old school friend that you see once in a while, and then you're happy to see him, but then he goes away. But it feels different this time. That's like as Adrian mentioned, there seems to be a lot more hype, a lot more use cases as well. So it's it's not like, oh, the last time he came around, oh, these are the things we could potentially do, but this time seems a bit different.
I feel like the difference now is the capabilities are starting to be there as well, and I think we mentioned this before, but like the scale of the investment, it's completely different. In the previous generation, it was relatively small time. You have a data scientist and an S3 bucket and an AWS, and you can do some AI. And now it's the scale of the investment and the capabilities that are coming out just phenomenal.
Yeah, I think the technology has moved fast over the past 5 years, right? I think when we were trying to experiment with AI, we were using the NLP technologies. Now we have the introduction of LLMs, and all these big tech companies are investing, like you said, a lot of money to make it work. I think being able to use it on very small, controlled use cases could actually give us value over the next couple of years. Maybe if we are super tangible or practical, where do you feel we could see the value first in pharmacovigilance?
I don't know that I would want to pick a use case. I think there's a lot. For me, I think it's going to come everywhere. It's really changing now, and it's becoming a much more powerful and potent tool. And you see how quickly it's evolving. I think one of the quotes that I like the best was from Sam Altman when he introduced one of his models, and he says, put your hand up if you think that you're smarter than this version of the model, right? In the room, and like it's an educated audience, and a fair amount of people stick their hands up, and probably rightly so. And then he says, leave your hand up if you think you'll be smarter than the next one. And of course, nobody knows how to answer that question. And I think you just don't know. You could really be a transformative machine around the corner that changes how we work and how we see things. And I think it will come everywhere. And if we have an open platform where we can experiment and plug things in, I think that's the most important now. And not yet the right time to pick winners or pick use cases. I think but I think it is getting to the time when we should open up and start experimenting.
Yeah, time to experiment and see what actually works, right, and how it behaves.
Yeah, it's for me. Yeah, I agree. I think automations with AI is going to be in everywhere, not in just one space. But for me, the question that I'm curious about is it going to lead to more standardization, or everyone's going to go off and have their own way of doing things using AI? I think it brings a lot of efficiency and looks promising, but it's also, I see a little bit of a risk of, because of these capabilities available, I'm just going to go on this path and I'm going to do a lot of things, and everyone start doing it. Is that going to lead to a standardization or not?
Yeah, I think you need some level of control, right? I think it's something that we'll be figuring out. And it'll be interesting to have the same conversation in 5 years when we actually know what happened, right?
It's important, but I think that's our responsibility to make sure that it works well. I think it's your responsibility to make sure that we have access to that technology, and that we have the opportunity to innovate and experiment.
Yeah, it comes back to that partnership, right? Working together, using our strengths, using your strengths, and then finding something or building something that actually works for the industry. I like ending this podcast with the same question because the answer is always interesting. So if your safety system was a superhero, who would it be?
All right. Have you had a chance to think about this one?
No, I'm going to let you answer that.
So I got. I reckon it's interesting. So the first thing that always comes to mind, you think about safety. You think of a shield. And good superheroes. There's plenty of superheroes out there who use a shield. But I think it might be better they're all a bit rough. And I think safety needs a more intellectual superhero. And I reckon something that might be a metaphor of the immune system would be good too. We need a good doctor here, a superhero doctor. Aegis is it was the shield of Zeus. So I'd go for Dr. Aegis would be my superhero, and I'd have him as with a superpower to control a network where he somehow sits in a control center, and he processes lots of information, and then sends out his the messages to the drones or to the army or to the other superheroes who execute.
You actually invented your own, right? You can start like your own comic, and then that's it. You're set.
How about you, Mayuran? Anything?
No, I think I like the shield idea. Like, and as you start describing it, I kind of had this thought, and everyone knows Cyborg from the DC universe, right? Like, I've somehow imagine a cyborg with his shield has access to the data, can do all these things, process information, but also has a shield.
Okay, I think I might have to repurpose my podcast and just talk about safety superheroes instead. We might do a spin-off. Let's see how that works out. Well, with this, Adrian, Mayuran, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was a pleasure having this conversation, and we hope that it was also valuable to our listeners.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, David, for having us in. Yeah.